Hi, my name is Frank Corliss. I'm the director of Bard College Conservatory of Music. I'm here in the lobby of the beautiful Sosnoff Theater with the conductor of this weekend's concert with the Orchestra Now, Leon Botstein. We're here to discuss this amazing program, Leon. I think it's really a fascinating pairing. I was really struck by it. When I first saw the program, I thought, well, these are two typical big romantic, big German romantic pieces. But you could not find two more disparate composers and two more disparate pieces. They're really incredibly varied and quite different. What drew you to pairing these two together in this program?
Well, it was a kind of, following your point, a kind of a perverse idea of taking people who wrote music in more or less the same time frame, in the same context, doing radically different things. And yet there's some resemblance between them. So the Till Eulenspiegel is from 1895, and the Bruckner 5 is earlier, but the composer, when Till Eulenspiegel was written, Bruckner was still alive. Barely, but he was alive. And he and Brahms died within 1 year of one another. But so you have like contemporary hinges. Strauss is kind of new generation, radical, enfant terrible, and he is everything Bruckner isn't. So he is a cynic. He is influenced by a kind of anti-religious, anti-metaphysical, idealist notion that music is a privileged art form that communicates divine, unspeakable feelings of the all and the world, and a kind of a glorified sense of the role of music as being spiritual in some privileged way. And for him, music was a life about our bodies, our human being. He was a realist. He was a musical realist. And he, although a great admirer and deeply influenced by Wagner, he never was taken in by the Wagnerian metaphysics. Wagner's claims about music and the political, moral, philosophical aspects of the way music was integrated in Wagner's idea of the total work of art. Strauss believed in music as a form of life, as an independent medium of human expression. But what he liked about it was about the joy of being human and alive.
There is a kind of physicality to his music, which is wonderful, which is really wonderful.
He's the dancer, in Zarathustra. He was an avid reader of both Nietzsche and the late Goethe, and very influenced. He played the bourgeois. He believed something that it was only by disciplining himself into being ordinary that he could do something extraordinary. That are people who cultivate their lives. They have berets, and they have styles, and they have personalities, but they have exhausted their creative capacity to do something original. Strauss's point of view, going to be original, got to blend into the crowd. So he loved to play cards. He didn't talk high philosophy. He wasn't trying to be smart. And he had a terrific sense of humor. And he had a terrific sense of the human. He was very much like Mozart. He really understood how the human and the music come together. So this tone poem is a real barn burner for the orchestra. Everybody gets to do something. It's very virtuosic. Yeah. And this is, in a way, a young professional orchestra whose members are going to go on to careers, and so they have to encounter the standard repertoire. So Till Eulenspiegel is something they have to sink their teeth in.
There are many excerpts that are on the auditions that they will take.
That's right. For those who don't know, Frank was the pianist of the Boston Symphony, so knows exactly the orchestral routine. And Don Juan, Till Eulenspiegel, a lot of these things just appear on the repertory lists for the players of all instruments. And but the idea here was that he was going to tell a story through music. He was going to, the sort of exploits of this, sort of terrible figure who finally gets hanged in the end of the piece, famously. And so he tells a story in a way that music only can tell the story. You get a sense it's in the physicality of his exploits, of his tricks, of his humor, of his irony, sardonic, when he finally is he's being executed, and you hear this military drum, and you hear he's about to get it. The first is sort of defiant. The second expression with the E-flat clarinet is a little, suddenly humbled, by the fact he's going to get killed. And then we encounter the epilogues of the memory of his presence, our own experience of him. That was in the beginning of the music, where there's sort of a bucolic opening, and then out of nowhere comes the famous horn passage, which sort of reflects a personality. So it's a real storytelling virtuosity.
Tell me about Till Eulenspiegel, because I have to confess, he has a lot of resonance, I know, for German culture, but what's his role in German society or in German tradition? Or
It's not great. It's one of many folk tales. He's a funny, smart, irreverent, pokes his nose at respectability in society and convention, and is intentionally shocking. And
do you think that's what Strauss found particularly appealing about him?
Oh yes, so Strauss was that himself without acting it. To many listeners, this was vulgar. This piece sounded vulgar and violated a kind of middle-class belief in the holy purity and sophistication of judgment that knowing good music meant. That kind of pretension has always given classical music a bad name. And in Strauss's case, he was poking fun at the audience. Enough people recognize how brilliant this was. And so there is a kind of a Liszt-like storytelling, skill that Strauss displays that far exceeds any of his predecessors. Interestingly, he also always admired Brahms, and
I didn't know that.
Oh yes, and he, in fact, he started out his career, when you look at the first symphonies, very much in that mold. His father was very conservative as a musician, a horn player. The horns do very well, all of Strauss. But he, so he was, and then he took a conversion a little bit to Wagner, but not totally. At the end of the day, the composer who was the end-all and be-all for him was Mozart. That was the pinnacle. And he shared with Brahms a pessimism. He felt that he was at a late stage in the decline of culture in the West. He was not an optimist. He wasn't thinking we moderns are going to create a new world. No, he was nostalgic, and he inherited Brahms's dark view of his place in history, despite his ebullience and the ability to write such fantastically entertaining things as this piece.
And he lived well into the 20th century, so he's quite.
But his greatest vocabulary is the vocabulary of nostalgia, of loss. Think of the end of Rosenkranz. The end of Liebe der Danae. Even the ecstatic end of Electra or Salome. The great achievements are very, very thoughtful interior essays in the human condition. Even Ariadne, but unbelievably good sense of humor. If we switch to Bruckner, now Bruckner is the other part of our program, which is the Fifth Symphony. The Fifth Symphony was in Bruckner's lifetime one of the more successful symphonies, but it was in a different version than listeners will hear at these concerts.
Yeah, I did want to get into that. I know it's very complicated, the whole editions.
Bruckner editions are a complicated subject. They match the controversies over, versions of Shakespeare or of the Bible, The criticism of Bruckner is manuscripts and editions is a bottomless pit, if you will. The reason is this, that Bruckner came to Vienna to teach counterpoint, and was beloved by a younger generation of students, including Hugo Wolf, Gustav Mahler, and their friends. Mahler's first publication with Rudolf Krzyżanowski was a piano version of the Third Symphony of Bruckner. And Mahler never studied with Bruckner, but knew him, and they all did, and they admired him. And he had difficulty getting his symphonies performed and
He seemed
published.
as unsuccessful in the world as Strauss seemed successful.
Totally.
You know,
And in fact, he was very insecure. Strauss was cocky,
Yes, it seems,
enormously cocky. So, like Haydn, Strauss was incapable of writing bad music. It was maybe not so interesting, but his craftsmanship was couldn't be broken in a way. Bruckner was an organist, a specialist in counterpoint, and he was, and also very influenced harmonically, particularly, and in some sense sonically by Wagner. He was a real acolyte of Wagner. He thought Wagner's harmonic imagination was path-breaking, and also the sort of innovative quality of the use of time, musical time. So he set about writing the symphonies, and these symphonies had, very unhappy histories. And so he relied on students and others for advice, and was constantly revising. In the case of the Fifth Symphony, it's very controversial because the first performance was by Joseph Schalk, was done in a different version that Schalk and Loewe, the two most prominent acolytes of Bruckner, had done. They slightly reorchestrated, they cut out a lot out of them, particularly the last movement, and it was shorter, and it was a great success.
and that's the version you recorded with London Philharmonic.
I've recorded this with the London Philharmonic.
It hasn't been
Much-
recorded a lot, though, right?
It has. Yes, the old timers, Knappertsbusch did it. Some old time conductors were unconvinced by the new editions, and I have been excoriated. My acquaintances who are Bruckner scholars will believe in some cases there are valid other versions, but most of them stick by a criticism of the versions printed in Bruckner's lifetime, that he allowed himself to be talked into. He was he was for the Viennese a very provincial figure. There's a legend told he was invited at a big dinner, and he was served caviar, and he was horrified that civilized people would serve fish eggs, and he spoke with a heavy dialect. He was from Linz, so people like Brahms and sort of a more liberal social set in Vienna looked down upon him as a country bumpkin. At the same time, he was the hero of a very right-wing, pan-German, anti-Semitic group. He allowed himself, for example, to be the honorary head of a new Wagner Society at the university, which excluded Jewish membership.
Oh, I didn't know.
But Bruckner was...
He's deeply Catholic.
Oh, unbelievably Catholic.
Yeah.
I mean, fanatically Catholic. And he wrote a lot of masses, and he was a great organ, world-class, world-famous organ virtuoso. So he wrote these symphonies, and they were very innovative in their use of time. So use of unisons and repetition, and the
epic
sonority.
length, even just the length alone, it's amazing.
The length derives from the fact that Bruckner is the only other great composer who resided in Vienna who was actually Austrian. There was Schubert and Bruckner. Beethoven wasn't. Mozart was Austrian, but from Salzburg.
Schubert, also known for his length, yeah.
And so Schubert, there's a connection between Schubert and Bruckner. So Schubert was the sort of common ground between the people who were sort of in Brahms's camp and those who were in Bruckner's camp. there's a lot of Schubert here. I mean, in the second movement and the use of Ländler, and there's also a connection to Mahler, as there is in Strauss. That Mahler is a kind of has features that are evident in Strauss and also in Bruckner. The symphonic form for Bruckner was somehow not about reality, but about imagination, about the metaphysical, about the religious, about the gesture of grandness and greatness. It had a kind of Wagner's a megalomaniacal idea of music as kind of a triumphant, expressive art form of humans that was more powerful than language in a way, as well as its devotional aspect of it. There is something inherently, seemingly meditative about Bruckner, which is one of the reasons why during the Nazi period, what's little known is that probably Hitler's favorite composer was not Wagner, but Bruckner. And when he planned this big, cultural center in Linz, that was also the home of Bruckner. And he was, really attached to this Bruckner repertoire. And during the Nazi period in Vienna, there were darkened Aryan religious concerts where the hall was darkened and people listened to Bruckner and was and this heavy, ponderous, ominous, orchestral sound became a kind of replacement for Christianity. It's a little awkward and
it seems a little perversion of what.
Totally, I mean, poor Bruckner. But the fact is that when you hear the great German tradition of Bruckner performance, it has still that spiritual overlay. There's something frighteningly, ominous about the sound, and it's not.
Do you take that same approach yourself?
No. So my view is that Bruckner has been very much misunderstood. So back to the Fifth Symphony, the edition that I first learned was the ways the symphony had been heard by everybody till the mid-1930s. So Sibelius, who loved this symphony, knew it in the version, not that we're playing it, in the Schock version. But Bruckner's publisher was a Jew, Gutmann. Loewe, one of the great acolytes, was of Jewish origin as well. So there was in effect the suspicion that the Jews had commercially ruined, and the Jewish publishers and students had bamboozled the poor innocent Bruckner into defeating himself as an artist. So they were going to cleanse the Bruckner repertoire of the stain of Jewish influence. So the new edition, the Urtext edition of Bruckner, the critical edition with Haas as the first editor, was a Nazi. It had an ideological.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yes, they're going to clean up and restore all the cuts and clean up the orchestration and do everything right to honor the master who was the true Aryan spirit. So there was a huge political, ideological agenda around this edition. And there were several conductors who said, I don't believe it, forget about doing this. But by the end of the Second World War, the Schalk did completely disappear. There isn't a conductor alive who does it. And it's, I think, wrong. And Bruckner scholars, they want to find a smoking gun. So there's no smoking gun by Bruckner saying, I approve of this edition. I don't think, as a historian, you need a smoking gun. The fact is there is more than one Bruckner version. The reason we're not doing the Schalk version is that I do not want to do a disservice to the musicians. These are young professional musicians, and they don't need to say, when they go to a first rehearsal and they get a job and somebody does Bruckner 5, all they know is what they think is a crackpot edition that some person did with them. That's not right. So they need to see what the standard practice is. I hope the Schalk comes back in the repertoire. One of the great things about the Schalk version, but this orchestra does a great job, is at the end there is a chorale.
Yes.
And this last movement is a counterpoint lesson.
Yeah.
But finally at the end, this chorale arrives. And it's like a military battle. So Schalk was no fool. So he brought in an extra brass choir, is sitting there until the end. And then out of nowhere comes this massive, fresh, and because the troops on stage are already dead. You know, they've been wounded by having to play this symphony all the way through. And finally, when the big chorale melody comes over, this massive closure, they got fresh troops, like reinforcements, to fight the battle to the end.
That's fantastic.
And so anyway, so the orchestra here has to be very skilled in holding its fire and also not overplaying at the end so that the chorale melody can be heard.
Yeah.
But there are wonderful things about the length of the last movement and the full elaboration of the counterpoint in the fugal writing. And so it is. It's a pleasure to do. It's a great symphony, but it's a completely different idea of music.
Yeah.
It is similar to, it's probably for the late 19th century, the moral equivalent of minimalism, of people like Andreessen
Yeah.
or Glass or even John Adams.
Yeah.
Well, repetition
Yeah.
and the static
Mm-hmm.
and repetitive motion and the kind of the meditative Sivraj. So there is something to Bruckner that is different about your experience of sound and time and place. Strauss is completely in clock time.
Yeah.
He never wastes your time. He's moving in human time. Bruckner is moving in some kind of angelic
Yeah.
time, which isn't our body rhythm
Yeah.
or our clock
Yeah.
rhythm. And it's
It's a
interesting.
wonderful antidote to the modern world in some
Totally,
ways. You know?
totally. And it's hard on the players. The same,
Yeah.
it's hard to play, an opera by Philip Glass. I mean, because the figuration is repetitive, and it's
It must also present special challenges for a conductor to kind of mold this long form over a course of 80 minutes and pacing and
yes, you're generous. I actually think conductors like it because it's hard to make a mistake.
Oh, is that true?
Right. It's so predictable in a funny way,
I see.
right?
Yeah.
So it's easy. Also, because the sound is so big, it appeals to the delusional aspects of conductors. You know what I mean? Oh, it's sound coming out to you. I mean, it's the reason conductors like it is not always attractive. Orchestras, the wind and brass don't mind it, but the string players, it is a workout, and the constant repetition. He wasn't really. Orchestra was not his medium. You can see him, pulling out the stops and these giant 19th century organs, but it's worth the effort. He is. He writes such beautiful harmony and counterpoint, and the melodic moments are deeply touching. In the second movement, there is a great lyricism about him. So it's worth performing. It no longer is quite as popular as it was. So after the Second World War, there was a Mahler revival. And interesting, in October, we're doing Mahler at the end of October here with the Conservatory Orchestra.
Mahler's second,
Mahler
yeah.
too. And we decided to bring music live back from the pandemic year with a bang.
Yes,
So
and that's-
Eulenspiegel, Bruckner, Mahler. And they sort of are in the same, they come from the same general, if you will, moment in history and milieu. Mahler is in the way the most inscrutable and complex. There's something very simple and direct, profound, but simple and direct about Bruckner, and something very sharply clear and literary and acute about Strauss's realism. And embrace of the physical, mortal aspects of who we are and the flawed nature, our failures.
Yeah.
you know,
It's kind of
our
Shakespearean in a
regrets.
way, yeah.
Oh yes, he's totally Mozart, Shakespeare, Strauss. They're in the same. They celebrate the grayness, the ambiguity, the extremes of human experience.
They appreciate the foibles of man, certainly.
Totally. And they both all had senses of humor. Now, I don't know, Bruckner has a sense of humor, and I'm not sure Mahler has a sense of humor. He has a sense of irony, but not sort of humor. Sarcasm, yes. So in Mahler, there is, he was Strauss's nearest contemporary and rival in a way as a conductor and composer.
Yeah.
And he was not liked by the Brucknerians because he rarely performed Bruckner uncut. Even for him, believe it or not, it went on too long. And so he was criticized, although he revered Bruckner in a way and learned a lot from Bruckner. The use of orchestral sonority is not those chorales, and so he gets a lot from Bruckner.
Like the final chorale of the Resurrection
Oh
Symphony.
yeah. And so Mahler has a different kind of spiritual and philosophical ambition. He has gestures that bear more resemblance to Strauss than to Bruckner. In the use of folk melodies and ironically, and so Bruckner's more Schubertian. The heavenly length Bruckner gets from Schubert.
And unironic.
No, unironic, no.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of irony. There is terror. There is awe. Religious
Spiritual
feelings,
terror,
awe, spiritual terror, yes, definitely. And awe. But there's not irony, and there's not real sarcasm.
Yeah.
There's no wit here.
You brought us this wonderful. I
Oh, yeah.
want to
So
make sure we.
before we depart,
You brought us this wonderful photo.
yes, I agreed to write for the Yale University Press Jewish Live series. There are a series of biographies, books on important figures of Jewish origin. So Yale has this very distinguished series. They've done a perfect job with it. And I've agreed to write the one on Gustav Mahler. So I'm in the midst of thinking not about retelling Gustav Mahler's life, but really trying to understand his work and life as well, and career in the context of his contemporaries and of the contemporary culture and politics of Europe and America, because he was in America. So I'm trying to do, I don't want to repeat what other people have done. And so I'm in the process of collecting materials and so, and I have a good friend in Vienna who is the most wonderful antiquarian bookstore I've ever known, the most sophisticated and competent and generous. And he and Georg Fritz Bernhardsteiner. And I've bought a lot of material, and I was looking for some rare philosophical works that Mahler read by Gustav Fechner, Edward Hartmann, things that are not in a library in America and hard to find. And these are things that are not going to be scanned, they're not going to be online, and actually people are throwing them out. They're the grandpa's books, and they're going to throw them out. So they're not expensive. And Bernhard has been terrific in finding this material that I need for the work on the book. And I was in Vienna actually for meetings, and he says, I got something to show you. He says, there's a famous photograph of Bruckner on his deathbed. And this has been reproduced in various books. And it's small, you know, like when you look at the picture of the Eiffel Tower, it's very small. You think, that's cute, And then after you go to France, it's a big thing, Books can be very deceptive, And so he said, I have the largest known in a collection of papers that they bought. They do a lot of work for libraries. There's this picture, a much larger version of this picture of Bruckner on his deathbed from the time. In other words, from the time it was taken in the 1890s. So I bought it, and it's actually an interesting photograph. But this is.
I'm not sure if the cameras will pick it up. If you can show
but
it, they
if
may
you
not.
can pick it up, it You can
It
see
captures some
Bruckner.
of his humanity, I
Yes,
think.
yes.
And
He's this very shriveled, shrunken man. He lived in a convent, if I'm not mistaken, deeply Catholic, and he was a really disciplined ascetic.
yeah,
He was an ascetic, spiritual character, whereas Strauss was. He loved money. His wife even loved it more, and he loved to spend it. And he both did this villa in Garmisch.
Yeah.
He loved 18th century painting, French painting particularly. And this villa was filled with what we in Yiddish would call tchotchkes, little, all kinds of, Bavarian and regional and 18th century knickknacks all over. And he was, he was an extremely thoughtful man. He understood the irony and, essentially, what he considered to be the hopelessness of the human condition, and the rare opportunities for joy. And music was
yeah,
one,
yeah,
and the moments of happiness that slip through our
yeah,
fingers,
yeah,
and the nastiness and superficiality of most people, the pretensions. He had a great sense of humor. He wrote his own libretto for an opera about his own marriage. So he was married to an opera singer who considered herself to be socially superior to Strauss. Came from some general's family, some aristocracy. And he was devoted to her. No one could understand. Devoted to her. Devoted. No straying eye, no. He was, and he credited her with his ability to work. In other words, she forced him to work.
Interesting.
She was somehow his framework. But beyond that framework, he had a very profound interest. You read the correspondence with Hofmannsthal. This was a very thoughtful man. There's a famous story that Fritz Busch was conducting the first performance of the Egyptian Helen, which is an opera with Hugo von Hofmannsthal about Strauss, which is about marriage, because Helen and Menelaus return, after the Trojan War, they return to sort of human beings. They gotta have reconcile, and he makes fun of Tristan because they drink a potion of forgetting, and then they drink a potion of remembrance. They come to terms with the reality that they're just normal people. So he uses these mythic figures as a way to tell a story about relationships and marriage. But since Pauline de Anna was an experienced opera singer, fine, sang Elizabeth and Tannhäuser, she was present in the dress rehearsal. And Fritz Busch was conducting. Strauss was in the audience, and she apparently was criticizing some of the scenery or costumes or setup. And anyway, Busch stops conducting because he's not sure about the tempo. It's a world premiere, and Strauss is behind him. So he consults with Strauss. The orchestra stops, and Strauss says something to Busch, and Busch says, "Listen, why don't you show me? Why don't you come into the pit?" He was a great conductor, conduct the passage. So Strauss agrees. He gets onto the podium, and he begins to conduct. But the stage, in the meantime, has been mesmerized by his wife's meddling about the thing. So he starts the scene, but he doesn't have the people on stage. There are various principals and chorus. And he can't get their attention. So he stops, and he sees she's sort of visible in the corner of the stage. And he stops, and he points his finger, and he quotes the last line of Salome, which, of course, everybody in the orchestra knew, which says, "Kill that woman." But she didn't like the opera about her own marriage, although he meant it well. But it was a very unusual couple, very, in that sense, wildly successful marriage. They had one son whom he doted on, and his daughter-in-law whom he doted on, who was from a Jewish family.
Yeah, and he did a lot
So
of work
he
too.
was, he got really nervous. He believed he was more important than the Nazis. He was more important than a political regime. So he got himself fired. He got himself out of favor, in favor. He tried to get away from any kind of real harm coming to his daughter-in-law. And but he was no hero and a collaborator. So it's hard to put together exculpatory sentences about him, but it isn't. I think Virginia Woolf said, that there's no causal connection between being a great human being and writing great work. And
That's for sure.
sometimes it doesn't work out that way. He was less evil than others, I would say, and the music is more compelling than others. Bruckner was genuinely, I think, a simple and unassuming. He had all kinds of, opinions and prejudice, which was from a kind of a less cosmopolitan background, I would say.
So tell me, just to kind of sum things up, why are we still listening to these pieces today, especially the Bruckner? Why is this relevant to us now? What's Bruckner telling us
That we don't already know.
in the 21st century?
Bruckner and Strauss, in different ways, are telling us about the possibilities of ideas, feelings, emotions that are not tied to language or to pictures. So we live in a heavily visual culture. We're tied to this. And this is a medium that's visual and linguistic. It also tells time. Its weakest suit is sound, right? One of the most powerful achievements of the human imagination is to create a world and to consume time that has meaning, but is not a language, is not telling anything. So you can hear till Eulenspiegel, and it can have no title, and it will draw you in. The variety of sonority, the variety of themes, harmonies, combinations, and the length. So we know what it means to watch a long movie. We know what it means to read a book, and that the imaginary framework that is not about instant gratification. Most commercial music is short, dense. It's a pop song. It's a hit song. Has lyrics. So the music is kind of a handmaiden of the lyrics.
Yeah.
This has no lyrics. There's no lyrics here. It's just sound over time. And it's meaningful, and we can follow it. And we have reactions to it, and it is a discovery of our own human capacity that's unique to sound. So what are we learning from these pieces is the possibility of communicating and thinking through a medium that is without words and pictures. And the great advantage of this is that it can be a common platform, a common ground between people who are quite different. So the fact is that because there are no pictures and there are no words, although the musical system is cultural, we know from your conservatory, for example, and our students here, we have students from all over the world, from China, from Japan, from Korea, from Malaysia, from Venezuela, from Argentina, people whose heritage is Northern European or Central European, for whom this is their music.
Yeah.
Right? And they are committed to it. They've owned it because
ownership,
music is not linguistic. It is not marked by a national characteristic the way a language is or a certain cultural tradition. You don't have to know anything about anything to enjoy this concert. It just is, it is in that sense, music is a shared platform in a time when we need more of a shared platform than we have. So this is, to me, the highest justification of how exceptional the human being can be, to have invented and done this kind of thing. And it's true in Chinese music, it's true in Indian music.
Yeah,
It's not about Western music. It's about music in general that does not rely on images or words to create its meaning or its structure, and therefore reconfigures our experience of our sense of time and place. So I think this is, and as you said from the very beginning, there's something about an orchestral sound that is completely tactile. And it's also a great example of how people can collaborate and work together and not simply be competitive, but collaborative. So there are many reasons. The easy reason, of course, is that all these young people are wonderfully talented and have spent a lot of years playing the instruments, and this is what they played it for. All the trombone players, all the horn players, they're there to do this.
You feel the energy from them.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes. And so this is what they do. So the same as why should we listen to this? I said, you know, I'm an actor, and my dream was to play Lear or Hamlet, you know. And so one explanation is that people want to play it, and knock wood, there are enough people who want to hear it.
Wow. Thank you, Leon. This is going to be an amazing concert. I really appreciate it, and have a good time. Enjoy yourself.
We will. Thank you.
Thanks.